The colony of Jamestown was founded by just over 100 English settlers on May 13, 1607, more than 13 years before the landing of the Mayflower. And it's for that reason that Jamestown is often known as our country's birthplace, because the tiny colony along the Virginia Peninsula was the first successful English colony in North America. Note that I said successful. That's because there had been previous attempts to establish an English colony, but they had all failed, with the most infamous example being the mysterious disappearance of the Roanoke colony in 1590. What you probably don't know is that Jamestown nearly joined Roanoke in vanishing off the map. In fact, for 2 days in June 1610, it did. The reason? Well, after a supply mission arrived at Jamestown, they discovered that over 80% of the colony's residents had died. But it wasn't the Spanish who had killed them. In fact, it wasn't even disease. Of the 500 colonists who had called Jamestown home, 439 of them had perished, and almost all of them had died of starvation. At that point, the decision was made to completely abandon Jamestown. Barely 3 years after the founding, the entire colony's surviving population boarded 2 ships bound for England. And to give you an idea just how close Jamestown came to completely failing, it was only after these 2 ships ran into another supply ship coming up the James River 2 days later that the survivors decided to turn around. And it wasn't just the extra supplies which saved Jamestown. When the colonists returned to the settlement in the summer of 1610, one critical reform would change everything. And that reform was the introduction of private property rights. You see, in 1611, Jamestown got a new governor named Thomas Dale. And one of the first things Dale did was abandon the communal system of farming that had existed since Jamestown's founding. Dale noted that the reason so many people had starved to death 2 years earlier was because, as one historian noted, the settlers did not have even a moderate interest in the soil. Everything produced by them went into the store, in which they had no proprietorship. In short, a lack of property rights meant that none of the settlers were free to enjoy the fruits of their own labor. Dale solved this by handing out 3 acres of land to each man in the colony and told them to work. But unlike the old system, where everything was collectively owned by the Virginia Company, the settlers were now allowed to own their own land and keep whatever they produced for themselves. The results were an incredible success. According to another historian, as soon as the settlers were thrown upon their own resources and each free man had acquired the right of owning property, the colonists quickly developed what would become the distinguishing characteristic of Americans: an aptitude for all kinds of craftsmanship, coupled with an innate genius for experimentation and innovation.